Sharon let out a protracted and very audible sigh as her body sank heavily into the receptionist's seat. She glanced at the clock over the door that she had just locked following the departure of her client. 9:48. The shop closed at 9, but she had been stuck there for an extra 48 minutes with Mrs. Osborne. Everyone knew that you never scheduled Mrs. Osborne for the last appointment of the day. Sharon wondered which of her co-workers had pulled that little stunt. Oh well, Mrs. Osborne just capped off one hell of a day. Sharon opened the appointment book to look at tomorrow's schedule. Jan Wilkins for a highlight, cut, and style at 9, Joe for a cut and eyebrow wax at 11. She smiled thinking about Joe's fixation on his eyebrows. It was about 3 months ago that he first mentioned how much he hated the unibrow look caused by the growth of hair across the space above his nose. Boy, that must have taken a lot of courage for him to even mention the fact that it bothered him. Sharon told Joe that there were several ways to control his problem. They discussed shaving, plucking, and electrolysis before settling on waxing. Now, Joe was a regular. Every 3.5 weeks he came in for a haircut and a wax. Her eyes ran down the rest of the schedule looking for free time. A half hour for lunch at 11:45, then no free time for the rest of the day. She finished up with M. McCarthy at 8. Sharon wondered which twin this was, Megan or Margaret. Megan loved the natural look and enjoyed showing off her freckles and naturally curly red hair. She just needed a trim. Margaret, on the other hand, was very into the gothic look. Her once red hair was now dyed jet black and as straight as an arrow. Sharon mentally ticked off the weeks since either of them was in to see her. Neither was due, so there was just a little bit of mystery to end the day. Now that she knew how the day would begin and end, she ran down the names in between. A familiar name penciled in at 2:15 brought a smile to her face. Jerry was an absolute doll. Sharon thought back to that Wednesday afternoon too, no, almost 3 years ago when a shy young man had entered the shop. It was one of those hot, lazy August days when people thought more about sunbathing on the beach and not about getting their hair done. It was supposed to be slow in the shop, but Sharon was going at a killer pace. She was right in the middle of Jan Wilkins highlighting and Anne's perm was processing. Linda talked to the guy a bit, then asked Johnny and Sue if they had room for a walk-in. They both said they were swamped. Linda looked over and caught Sharon's eye. Sharon was about to shake her head no. She really didn't have any openings, but the poor guy looked so downtrodden that she agreed. It'll be about 40 minutes. She called across the room. Can you wait? At first, it looked like the guy was going to say no and leave. He looked over at Sharon, smiled, and shook his head yes. Sharon looked over at the guy as she continued to work on January. Sharon really did need to pay attention since Jan liked the weave. 3 bowls, 2 with color, 1 with bleach, were laid out on top of her cart. Somehow, though, her attention kept wandering over to the little guy patiently waiting his turn. He was sitting in the reception area looking through one of the hairstyle books. No, he wasn't really looking through the book. He was moving back and forth between 2 pages in the front of the book. Short female hairstyles? Sharon was mentally grabbed and brought back to the task at hand when Jan said, "That's the wrong color. You just used that one, it's time for the blonde strands." Sharon and Jan compared notes and Sharon had to admit that she had lost track. Sharon moved Jan Wilkins to a dryer to speed up the processing. Anne's perm wasn't quite ready yet, so she went out to the reception area to introduce herself. He said his name was Jerry and took her offered hand in a firm yet delicate grip. He had seen her coming and quickly closed the book, so Sharon never did find out what hairstyles caught his interest. "It shouldn't be too much longer," she said as she headed back to check on Anne once again. About an hour later, she saw Jan Wilkins out the door and turned toward Jerry. "You ready?" She led Jerry to her chair for the consultation. She asked him what he wanted. His answer was non-committal except to say that he really wanted to let his hair get a little longer. Sharon asked if he had seen any styles in the book that he wanted to try. Jerry blushed a vivid red and said no. Sharon ran her fingers through Jerry's hair. He was currently sporting a slightly longer version of the Ivy League haircut. A little length on top and very tapered on the sides and back. He fingers brushed his hair this way then that way as she discussed options. They finally agreed that she'd just clean up the neck a little and trim the ends today. Sharon described a style that was longer on top with clippered sides. She went over and got the book Jerry was looking at earlier and placed it on his lap. They thumbed through the men's styles while Sharon tried to find a picture of the look she described. She just couldn't find the right style, which Sharon already knew, so they turned to the women's short style pages until she found the style she was looking for. Jerry offered a rather weak protest that it was a girl's style, but Sharon saw the little flicker of delight in his eyes. Nonsense. I've got a number of male clients who wear this style. Sharon lied. I think it would look good on either a man or a woman. They chatted over the next 27 minutes as she washed, cut and styled Jerry's hair. He left a very generous tip, but Sharon was convinced that she'd seen the last of him when he left without making a follow-up appointment. Jerry was a fading memory 4 weeks later. Sharon was just finishing up a man's trim when Linda announced that her 12:30 had arrived. Sharon looked up annoyed since she knew she didn't have a 12:30 and had planned on using that hour for shopping. Her anger melted when she saw Jerry sitting in the waiting area. He was so engrossed in looking at the hairstyles that she was able to sneak up on him and look over his shoulder. "That's a very popular style," she said. "I get a lot of requests for it. I haven't had any requests from my male customers, but I think if you shortened it a little here and here, it would look great on a face shape like yours. Did you want to try?" "No," Jerry stammered. "I was just trying to find that style you showed me last time." "That's all right, I remember it. Why don't we go back and get you shampooed? We'll see what we can do." Jerry's hair grew very fast. There was almost an inch of new growth. Sharon was able to get a close approximation of the style from the last week. As she demonstrated various styling options, she saw the delight in Jerry's eyes and decided to try something. "This style really looks good on you, but I think it would have a whole new dimension if we added some depth to your hair color." "What do you mean depth?" "Well, your hair just doesn't stand out. Your color is what girls call a really mousy brown. I wouldn't suggest you change the color drastically. Just add some dimension with a warm chestnut or possible some golden highlights. Here, let me go get my color swatches and show you." Sharon returned with a large metal ring. Numerous hair swatches were attached to the ring. She quickly went through the swatches until she found the one she was looking for. "See," she said, holding the medium chestnut brown swatch up over Jerry's forehead. "Doesn't this look a lot better? Or, how about just a light highlighting?" she said, holding a golden blonde swatch so that the hairs mingled with Jerry's own brown hair. "See, that brightens up your whole face without changing your basic hair color." Jerry somewhat reluctantly agreed to the highlights and made an appointment for 4 weeks later. Sharon spent the next 4 weeks wondering if she would see Jerry again. She really thought he would chicken out at the last minute. For weeks to the day, Sharon was pleasantly surprised to see Jerry come through the door. Sharon immediately could see that his hair had continued to grow at a very fast rate. It was almost long enough for the full effect of the style they had selected. She hurried through the kids' cut on 7-year-old Samantha Walsh and went out to say hi to Jerry. "Well, are you ready for the big change?" Sharon asked with a grin. Jerry's jaw dropped a full 2 inches. "I thought you said this wouldn't change my normal color, just add brightness." Jerry stammered with a look of genuine alarm. "That's what I said and that's what I meant," Sharon replied. "I was just joking with you, but I can see that I'll have to make a note on your card that you don't have a sense of humor." "I do to have a sense of humor," Jerry said with an exaggerated pout. "What is this card thing, anyway?" "I always make out a card on clients who get chemical services," Sharon said, handing a 5x7 card to Jerry. "I need your name and a phone number at the top." As Jerry was filling out the card, Sharon continued, "I keep a record of all the processing we do. That was, I know exactly what we did and can duplicate or modify the formulas. I want your phone number just in case there's a product recall. You know, like when the manufacturer finds out that the color I used on you will turn purple in 3 weeks. I can call you the night before to warn you what to expect when you look in the mirror the next day." "That's not really funny," Jerry said. Could the color really turn purple? I suppose that anything is possible, Sharon replied. It hasn't happened to any of my clients yet, so I guess you could say I'm due. How about it, Mr. Macho Man? Are you ready for some girly treatment? There was just a brief spark of alarm in Jerry's eyes before he laughed and told her to lead the way to Frankenstein's lab. Sharon got Jerry seated in her chair and got her color swatches one last time to make sure. Jerry actually selected a lighter shade of blonde for the highlights than they had agreed on last visit. Sharon agreed that it was a better look but warned Jerry that the contrast would make it noticeable. He said that was fine and that he'd done a lot of thinking over the past 4 weeks. He had decided that he'd sort of like to be a blonde and grow his hair a little longer. Sharon went back to mix the highlighting solution. When she returned, Jerry had one of the hairstyle books open on his lap. He was looking at the women's short hairstyles ad, didn't seem the least bit concerned about being seen. They discussed various styles as Sharon sectioned off Jerry's hair, ran the tail of the comb to separate the hair, placed the aluminum foil strip against his head and brushed on the solution. Sharon continued to work as they settled on the wedge for Jerry's next look. When the last foil was in place, Sharon guided Jerry, looking like a futuristic creature with his head full of shiny metal packets, over to the dryer to help speed the process. As the dome of the dryer slipped down over Jerry's head, Sharon wondered if she had gone too far. Jerry did say that he wanted to be a blonde, but he hadn't said he wanted to be a blonde today. Well, technically he wasn't going to be a true blonde, but his hair was going to be visible lighter. Sharon had gotten a little carried away and highlighted much more than she had originally planned. She'd make it up to Jerry with a great cut and blow dry. Wow. She hadn't meant to say anything, but it just slipped out as she pulled the foils from Jerry's head. He looked great. Almost blonde, but great. What's the matter? Jerry asked with more than a little concern. Nothing, you just look so good, Sharon exclaimed. Jerry settled in Sharon's chair once again and she removed the towel that had covered his head during the walk from the sink. Even wet, you could tell that Jerry's hair was lighter and brighter. I'm blonde, he said, moving closer to the mirror. Sharon was about to answer, to apologize and offer to cover the blonde up when Jerry continued, it actually looks pretty good. I know I said I was thinking about being blonde, but I really didn't want to start having more fun today. They both laughed. Sharon made a couple of comments about the hype about blondes having more fun. Jerry promised to let her know if the saying proved true. They talked about the color. Sharon did offer to use a brown color to tone down the blonde, but Jerry didn't want to hear it. As she cut Jerry's hair, he continued to look. Once in a while, he simply said wow. Jerry left happy that day with a new blonde short wedge. 2 months later, Jerry's hair had grown out into a very nice feminine wedge. Where men with wedged tend to keep the top a little shorter and to run the taper up higher on the sides and back, Jerry's hair was tapered at the nape of the neck only. The sides reached almost to the bottom of his ears if they were left straight. Jerry had also encountered Joe the previous month. He had asked Sharon where she and Joe had come from at the back of the salon. Sharon replied that Joe had his eyebrows waxed every visit. She went on to say that a lot of men had their brows shaped up in the salon. She asked Jerry if he wanted her to wax his brows and was surprised when he agreed. They went back into one of the waxing rooms and Sharon told Jerry to get up on the table. He lay down with his head on the pillow. Will this hurt? I guess it stings a little when I rip all those nasty, unsightly hairs out by the roots, Sharon replied. But that shouldn't bother a big man like you. Sharon carefully applied the wax to the area directly over Jerry's nose. There weren't many hairs growing there, but there were a few. Boy, did his eyes get wide when she pulled the cloth with the wax and hairs away from his face. Jerry started to get up, but Sharon gently but firmly pushed him back down. We're not done yet, she said. There are a few stray hairs below the brow line that I want to clean up. Sharon went over to the wax and returned with the stick loaded once again. This time she carefully traced along the bottom of Jerry's brow. The wax coated more than just a few stray hairs. She pressed the cloth to the wax and pulled. The process was repeated on the right side. Sharon returned to the left brow and traced along the top of the brow this time. Again, the pressure and again the rip as wax and hair disappeared. She inspected her work before handing a hand mirror to Jerry. He stared at his slightly arched brows. They were very, very feminine. They looked good, but were definitely on the feminine side. Jerry didn't say anything but continued to stare. The staring continued once they returned to the stylist's chair up front. They talked about hair and fashion, but Jerry's mind seemed to be elsewhere. For the third time in the brief span of 6 months, Sharon was convinced that she'd gone too far and had seen the last of Jerry. However, here he was again. As Sharon greeted Jerry in the reception area, he quietly asked if she could touch up his brows again. When they were safely in the waxing room, Jerry said that he was upset the last time because Sharon had given him girl brows. He said that no one seemed to notice except to say he was looking good. He told Sharon that he looked at his brows every morning and evening for the past 4 weeks and had come to a decision. He liked what he had but wanted more. He asked Sharon if she could arch his brows a little more this time and make them thinner. "You know, cute," he said as if that was all the description needed. "Are you sure?" Sharon asked. "Last time you seemed a little upset when you saw how I shaped your brows. I was sure you weren't coming back." "Well, I was a little concerned then." Jerry started. "Actually, I was really ticked at you. I stayed mad the whole time you were cutting my hair. On the way home I kept looking at my face in the rearview mirror and, you know what, they started to grow on me. Then at work, a couple of the girls in the office commented on how good and youthful I looked. I don't know if it was the brows or the fact that I lost 15 pounds and have been taking aerobics classes. Anyway, it really doesn't matter 'cause I want them to be shaped." Karen was reluctant at first. Back in the waxing room, she applied the wax and just took a little additional hair off the right brow. She handed the mirror to Jerry before proceeding. Jerry spent a good 5 minutes looking. He put his left hand over each eye, alternating to inspect each one independently. Finally, he seemed to reach a decision. "I think we need just a little more off here," he said, pointing to the highest point of the arch, "and they should taper a little earlier. Boy, wax a guy's eyebrows just one time, and he begins to think he's a fashion expert," said Sharon. Jerry looked up at her. Then they both laughed. Sharon went back to work with the wax and finally got Jerry's approval. When Jerry was seated back in Sharon's styling chair, they discussed several options for his hair. The repeated highlighting sessions had transformed him into a complete blonde. Sharon suggested that it was time to start over. She suggested that they color Jerry's hair a light to medium brown, then add highlights. She had to go over to grab the color swatches to show Jerry what it was going to look like. He agreed and she headed back to mix the color. Jerry sat in the chair and looked all around the salon. It was really quite busy for a Thursday afternoon. He watched a slim redhead get her hair set on really large rollers. Next to her, a young blonde girl was getting a spiral perm. Across the salon, Jerry could see one of the stylists blow-drying the hair of a woman of about 30. Her highlighted hair was cut in a short, layered look. Jerry was fascinated, as the stylist effortlessly seemed to command the lady's hair to perform with just a touch of her hand. There were no combs or brushes, just fingers. Fingers that knew just when to fluff and when to scrunch. Sharon returned and spun the chair back around. Jerry was about to protest but was afraid of looking foolish. He really did want to see the finished style but could only manage a partial glimpse of the lady's reflection in the mirror as she paid. He'd been thinking about this ever since the first day he came into the salon. Jerry marshaled all his courage. "Sharon? Yeah. I was wondering what it would be like to try some additional styles." "What do you mean additional styles? Do you want me to give you a crew cut?" "No, that's not what I meant. I mean, look, I have finally gotten up the nerve to let my hair grow and let you wax my brows. Now I think I should try out some different styles to see what looks good on me. What would you do if one of your other clients came in and asked for a makeover?" "Is that what you want, a makeover?" "No, not necessarily. And you're not answering the question." "Well, if a cute guy came in and asked to try something new with his hair, the first thing that would happen is that someone would be picking me up off the floor 'cause guys don't do that sort of thing." Haven't you noticed, a guy will get his hair cut into a certain style at the age of 15 and then stick with the style almost forever? Yeah, the length changes about every 5 years, but most guys don't even follow these trends. It's the same old cut every time. I don't. Wait, let me finish. I don't get to rant like this very often. Now, where was I? Oh yeah, back to guys and their hair. You know what I'd really like? Just once, I'd like a guy to come in here with longer hair, like yours. He'd come in and sit in my chair and I'd ask what I could do, you know, the personal consultation part, and he'd look me right in the eyes and say, I'm feeling adventurous. Why don't you give me the style you think would look best on me? I'd say something sarcastic like, can I curl your hair into little ringlets if I like? And he'd look at me and say, darlin', you can do anything you want. Now, what can I do for you, sir? I'm feeling adventurous, Jerry said with a big grin. Why don't you give me any style you think would look good? God, I've waited 7 years to hear those words. I hope you're serious, Jerry, 'cause we're going to have some fun. Now, you have to sit there for a few minutes while the color processes. Do you want to look at one of the style books and pick something out, or would you rather have me give you the tousled look by running my fingers through your hair while I blow it dry? Didn't think I'd noticed you staring at Terry Collins? Sharon added in response to the startled look in Jerry's eyes. Why do you think I turned you around and tried to stand in the way? I thought you were going to twist your head clear off the way you were turning back and forth trying to see. You knew? And you went out of your way to keep me from seeing the results? Jerry, Lisa is a very talented stylist, but she didn't know the first thing about finger styling till she watched me. I think it's time to give her another lesson. You ready? Let's go on back and shampoo. 10 minutes later they were back at the chair. Sharon had 2 bowls with different colored goo in each. She explained to Jerry that she was going to alternate colors for the highlighting and that the effect would be great. She started about 2/3 the way up the back of Jerry's head by sectioning off and pinning the hair above the part up. The tail of her comb made a quick back and forth motion as she deftly separated the first strand to be highlighted. The foil was placed under Jerry's hair and Sharon brushed on the blue goo. The foil was folded into a little pouch and then clipped to the hair above. Again the comb tail snaked its way through a small section of hair. The foil was followed by a liberal dose of the golden goo. The process repeated itself until Jerry's head was covered in little foil packs. It was off to the dryer where Sharon handed him a magazine of short celebrity styles and walked away. Jerry cooked for 15 minutes before Sharon came back, checked a couple of the foil packets and pronounced him done. Back to the sink for another wash and condition. Sharon put some fragrant conditioner on Jerry's hair and told him that they were going to leave the conditioner in for 5 minutes. She helped Jerry to a sitting position and said she'd be back. A girl with a chin-length reddish bob came and sat next to Jerry. Wow, I really love your hair, she said. It's really neat that you have such a strong self-image that you feel comfortable wearing your hair longer. She saw the protest forming on Jerry's lips and quickly went on, you know, I think most men secretly are afraid of not being manly enough. That's why they insist on wearing their hair short and hanging out at the girly bars with the guys. I was watching you talking to Sharon. You smile and laugh, frown and comment when something doesn't look right. All in all, you strike me as a very confident, self-assured man. Oh, and your hair is to die for. Sharon interrupted the conversation before Jerry could respond. His hair was rinsed and they went back to the styling chair. About 2/3 of the way through the styling, Jerry mustered his courage and asked Sharon out to dinner when they were done. Sharon hesitated while she considered the implications of accepting Jerry's offer. On the one hand, she had promised herself that she'd never date a client, but this really wasn't a date. She decided that, since it was just a couple of friends getting together, she'd accept. Jerry waited in the reception area while Sharon cleaned up. He walked her to the garage across the street to put her case away, and then they headed for a little Italian bistro that Jerry knew. Jerry proved to be a great conversationalist and Sharon was lost in the magic of his stories. She asked Jerry what had prompted his first visit. Jerry replied that he had always had longer hair when he was growing up. He told Sharon about going to the salon with his mom on Saturday morning. His face lit up when he mentioned the wonderful smells and the pleasant chatter as all the women got their hair done. He told Sharon that he always was a little bit jealous of the women. He said that his hair reached almost to his shoulders. One Saturday, just as his mom was being led away to begin the beauty ritual, she turned and asked Jerry if would help Leslie out. Leslie was the shampoo girl. She was also the only worked in the salon below the ancient age of 30. She was a babe. It seemed that Leslie had just graduated from beauty school and needed to practice for her state exams. Jerry's mom had suggested that Leslie practice on Jerry to help make the time go by faster. Jerry protested but, in the end, agreed to let Leslie give him the works. Jerry headed back to the shampoo bowls right behind his mom. Leslie ran the water over her hand until the temperature was just right. As the water cascaded down on Jerry's head, he saw his mom lean over and whisper something to Leslie that made them both laugh. Leslie said something in reply as she nodded, but Jerry couldn't hear over the sound of water. Leslie and Jerry went back to the front of the salon. Leslie apologized for the flowered cape, saying it was the only one available. She combed through Jerry's wet hair and sectioned it off. Then she used the pointed end of her comb to select a thin band of hair. She folded a small piece of paper over the hair and began rolling Jerry's hair. When she had the curler tight against Jerry's scalp, she fastened it with a little end plug attached with a rubber band. She continued to section and roll Jerry's hair until his whole head was covered with curlers. Leslie bent over and said something about Jerry's mom and a permanent. Jerry could really hear with the noise of the hairdryer at the next booth, so he just nodded. What did Jerry care if his mom got a permanent anyway? Leslie mixed the contents of 2 small bottles together and shook the larger bottle. She then began applying the fragrant solution to Jerry's hair. Sharon had already guessed as Jerry told her about his first perm. He then went on to explain how his dad had screwed himself into the ceiling that night. In the end, he marched Jerry out to the garage and, using a pair of dog clippers, gave Jerry his first crew cut, saying that he didn't raise no sissy. Jerry was crushed. He really had liked his curls. Mom had told him how great he looked and took him to lunch. He was embarrassed when the waiter asked what he could get for you ladies, but he let it pass. Jerry told Sharon that the event occurred when he was 12 and he spent the next 6 years with a classic crew cut. He started to let his hair grow out while he was in college, but his dad was quick to point out that he was paying for Jerry's college and Jerry would follow his dad's grooming standards. This lasted for a year. Jerry surprised his parents by getting a loan his sophomore year. He signified his freedom by letting his hair grow. Even though he went around campus with a ponytail, he was afraid to go to a salon. When he graduated, Jerry got his hair cut to aid in his job search. He got a good job developing software and soon found that no one cared what he looked like as long as he got the job done. He began letting his hair grow out but couldn't quite manage to keep it looking neat when one of the other developers suggested that he visit a salon for a trim. That was the day he first met Sharon. Jerry left that evening with a new look, a new friend and confidant, and a newfound sense of confidence. Joseph, who worked next to Sharon, was very active in the gay community. Sharon was surprised when he approached her 2 weeks later and asked if she would give a hair and makeup demonstration to a local tea group the Saturday after next. Sharon protested that she didn't know the first thing about transgendered people. Joseph asked about Jerry and suggested that Sharon use Jerry as her model. Reluctantly, she agreed. Jerry was lukewarm to the suggestion that he be Sharon's transgendered model, especially if it meant that he'd end the session in a dress. In the end, he agreed and promised that he'd let Sharon practice before the demonstration. The first practice was in the salon the following Thursday. Sharon met Jerry at the door and immediately led him to a secluded booth near the back of the salon. She explained that she was confident that she could do Jerry's hair but wanted to practice with the makeup. Jerry almost ran out of the store but reluctantly agreed to stay. Sharon began with a foundation and then began to add powders and liquids. Jerry watched in amazement as the shy young guy became a good-looking woman. Not beautiful by a long shot, but definitely attractive. Sharon stared at her work for a couple of minutes, then began to clear the canvas for a second work of art. The process was repeated 3 more times that afternoon. Afterwards, Sharon asked Jerry out to dinner, but he declined. They agreed to meet on Sunday afternoon. They practiced 3 more times before the big day. Joseph introduced Sharon to the group. There were about 30 girls in the crowd. Sharon invited Jerry up on the pallets covered with plywood that served as the stage. Sharon started trying to explain what she was doing but found it difficult to work and talk at the same time, so she would explain the process, demonstrate, and then explain again. 2 hours and 23 minutes after taking the stage, she was done. The group quickly moved in to ask questions or to see Jerry up close. Sharon was worried about Jerry, but he seemed to be doing okay each time she looked. Jerry attracted quite a crowd and he seemed to be having a good time describing the experience. Once, when they were relatively close together, Sharon heard Jerry offering advice on colors to an older lady. What amazed Sharon most was that Jerry's advice was right on. After about an hour of questions, Sharon moved over to Jerry. "What do you say? Ready to change out of that dress and get a quick bite on the way home?" "I'll pass. A couple of the girls invited me out for a girls' night at a little club down the street. It sounds like fun. Why don't you come along?" "Well, okay. I think you were a big hit. Monique over there promised to give me a ride home later. I'm sure I'll be okay." Sharon worried about Jerry that night. In fact, she was still worried at the next afternoon at 2:43 when he finally answered his phone and reported that he was safely in the house. Sharon asked Jerry to meet her for a plate of pasta so they could compare notes. He agreed but said that he had to make it an early night. Sharon was sitting anxiously when Jerry finally glided through the door. He took the seat across the table from her and said hi. Sharon gave him a hi right back and noticed that Jerry still had a trace of eyeshadow. She was about to offer to remove it when she noticed a very interesting fact. The eyeshadow Jerry was wearing was a bronze. Sharon remembered that they had not used the metallic shades during the demonstration. Where had Jerry gotten the new eyeshadow? Sharon wondered as they sipped a bottle of Chianti. 3 weeks later was Jerry's normal appointment. He arrived about 5 minutes late, out of breath and saying he was sorry, but something came up at the last minute. Sharon took Jerry back to the room for his eyebrow waxing. She had to remove the eyebrow pencil before she could apply the wax. Jerry explained that he really had enjoyed the demonstration. He talked about the girls' night at the club. He said that he'd been experimenting with just a touch of makeup to help bring out his best features. They joke about this for the rest of the afternoon. Jerry left in a great mood. There was no trace of makeup during Jerry's next 3 visits. Each time they waxed, highlighted, and styled Jerry's hair. By this time Jerry was sporting a cute bob that reached almost to his shoulders. Sharon was finishing up when the urge to try something new hit. She asked Jerry if he was willing to be a little daring. He agreed, but with more than a little reluctance. Sharon got out the magnetic rollers. She lightly misted Jerry's hair and set the ends curling outward on the rollers. She placed 2 rollers across the front and whisked Jerry off to the dryer. 10 minutes later, Sharon unveiled Jerry's new flip hairdo. A shot of spray and the ends curled neatly and unyieldingly. Jerry also had a big set of bangs that also stayed firmly in place. Jerry wore his new style out of the shop that afternoon. Sharon watched him cross the street. Was that a feminine sway of the hips, she wondered? Jerry canceled the next 3 appointments because of a family medical problem. On December 12th, Sharon rushed into the shop 3 minutes late for her 10 o'clock. She took a quick look at the appointment book and noticed that Jerry was scheduled for 3. At least she thought it was Jerry, but the name in the book was spelled Jerry. It was 3:20 when Sharon went out to the front wearing a big smile for her favorite guy. The only problem was, there was no Jerry. Sharon had just turned to ask Lindsay where her 3 o'clock was when a somewhat familiar voice asked, "What's the matter? Have you forgotten what I look like after only 3 months?" Sharon gasped as the attractive young lady stood and offered her hand. Sharon brushed the hand aside and grabbed her friend in a great big bear hug. "I can't believe this. You look great. When? Where? Are those real?" A million questions flooded out of her mouth. Jerry stood there patiently enjoying the scene. When Sharon finally ran out of steam, he replied, Let's see. Thanks. About 2 months ago. A little, local clinic that a friend recommended. And yes, these are mine. Jerry said, cupping her hands under his breasts. Sharon looked at her friend. She asked what she could do. Well, I'm feeling a little adventurous and heard that there was a talented stylist who just loved to be turned loose. You can do whatever you want to make me beautiful. Sharon stared, not knowing where to start. Jerry's hair reached to her mid-back in a cascade of loose, full curls. The color was a light brown, close to Jerry's original color but in no way mousy. Sharon suggested some highlights. She looked at Jerry's face. The eyebrows were nicely arched but fuller than she had ever left them. She asked about waxing. Fine, but the only thing I need right now is a bikini wax. Jerry replied. Sharon was at a loss for words. She managed to stammer out her agreement and the two friends headed to the familiar wax room. Jerry continued straight back to the bathroom where she donned one of the salon's cotton gowns. She then returned for her waxing. After the door was closed, Jerry hopped up on the table and pulled the gown up, exposing a creamy thigh. Sharon could only stare, wanting to ask the obvious question but at the same time very afraid of the answer. Yes, I still have it. Jerry said nonchalantly. I have no desire to give up my manhood, at least for now. Sharon got the wax ready but couldn't see any hair that needed removing. Jerry laughed. Aren't lasers great? No more shaving, anywhere. Don't look at me like that. I saw you had questions and knew that you'd never ask them out in the public section of the salon. Let me start with the obvious question. To be honest, I don't know why, but it just seemed the natural thing to do. I really have to thank you for opening my eyes that day at the demonstration. I met so many great people. We went out a few times after that evening. Most of the time I was the lucky guy with 3 or 4 women. A few times the girls helped me dress and we'd have ladies' night. I found the more and more I wanted to be one of the girls. I went to a counselor, first for individual counseling, then as part of a group. I wanted to talk to you, to tell you what was going on, but I couldn't. Then, about 4 months ago, I made my decision. I started laser treatments, had my face slightly reshaped, and gave myself an early Christmas present. They're 34 CS. The worst part of all this was that I didn't get to see you for the past 3 months. I wanted to talk to you so badly, but I didn't want you to see the half-finished project, so I waited. Sharon and Jerry hugged for the better part of an hour that afternoon. They talked like old friends as Sharon highlighted and trimmed Jerry's hair. Jerry stayed behind while Sharon cleaned up and the two ladies went out on the town. It was well past 3 in the morning when Jerry tucked Sharon into bed. He gently kissed her forehead and wished her a good night. Sharon had hoped for something more that night. She thought that Jerry would stay the night in her bed but was secretly glad that it didn't happen. In the year since that night, the strong friendship has grown even better. Jerry is Sharon's daughter's godmother. She was there for Sharon's miscarriage. She held on to her friend and, together, had weathered some rough seas on their journey through life. Each was a beacon for the other, helping to set a course through the dangers and into the safety of the harbor of friendship. Yes, it's been quite an adventure, thought Sharon as she, with a smile on her face, turned out the lights, locked the door and headed home to her family. Tomorrow would be a good day after all.